My Steam Deck arrived a few weeks ago after a year-long wait, and it's glorious in all of its chunkiness. If you're anything like me, you've already seen a ton of reviews talking about how performant this Steam machine is and how its existence could have some ripple effects on the handheld market in general, despite initial units kinda shipping with beta software. And yet, I haven't really experienced any cases in which I've disagreed with the idea that this is a gaming computer with more bite than bark. But like the myriad other devices we cover on this channel, it's not perfect. There are some definite downsides, which might make this machine more of a niche purchase than a must-buy for anyone interested in handhelds in general. But let's take a look. In previous videos, we talked about the greatness of the Steam controller and the lackluster appeal of Steam machines. The Steam Deck takes both of those Valve inventions and mashes them together into a portable device that does many things better than either alone. The device itself is a bit like a souped-up Wii U gamepad with a central 720p 16:10 IPS display that's perfectly adequate but not mind-blowing, and two thumbsticks pushed all the way to the top. Those thumbsticks might be the first point of contention for anyone with deep muscle memory for Xbox or Switch controllers, but in practice, having thumbsticks at the top means I have fewer hand cramps during long play sessions, from one thumb needing to either sit lower or reach quite a bit to maintain controls. I could see it not being for everyone though. The same could be said about the D-pad and face buttons to the stick's sides. Their placement is a bit awkward at first, but outside of a few PlayStation games where I've had to press face buttons while controlling the camera in the past, I've always tended to take my thumbs off of the thumbsticks anyway to press any of those buttons. It's just, overall, less distance for my fingers to travel, which is appreciated, especially since they feel quite good to use. Still, not quite as satisfying as, say, a Series X controller, but you know, Valve's getting there. Where those buttons would typically live on a more standard layout are two haptic touchpads. Gone are the comfy, deep wells of the Steam controller, and in their place, two kinda mushy squares with the same satisfying haptic feedback I've come to expect from a Steam controller. It won't be for everyone, but it's been more than enough to make controlling a mouse in desktop mode or in-game cameras feel just a bit more responsive. Equally so since placing a thumb atop the trackpads or on the capacitive pad atop the thumbsticks enables gyro control in games for just that little bit of extra precision for anyone willing to master it. Rounding out the button input, we have two menu buttons, plus the typical start, select, shoulder, and analog trigger buttons. The shoulder buttons and triggers feel comfortable in use, with some slight curvature to the buttons making them easier to rest my fingers on, yet the grip buttons don't feel the best so far, and have led to many accidental button presses. Luckily, they can all be disabled anywhere where they become annoying. Looking at the Steam Deck as a whole, the one potential downside to its form factor is that it's massive. It's about the right size for me personally as a larger person with large hands, but smaller folks with smaller hands may have more complaints about even holding the Steam Deck for long periods of time. Still, even for me, holding it up for a while doesn't feel as good as it could. Like with the Switch, the straight sides cause holding the device at certain angles to bend my wrists a bit, resulting in some unpleasant cramps. The extreme width of the Steam Deck, combined with the slope of the bottom edges, reduces the problem quite a bit compared to the Switch, but it's still been noticeable over time. But all that is worth it to get such fantastic performance, right? Well, temper your expectations. I mean, I can't really understate how impressive it is that this is basically a mid-range laptop crammed into a form factor I can take with me anywhere. I mean, a decade ago, handhelds were struggling to run modern console games with any consistency. Now, I can play Portal in the middle of a park without an internet connection. How cool is that? I mean, if the Switch was a turning point for portable home console gaming in 2017, the Steam Deck is the same for PC gaming in 2022. The Steam Deck finally achieves Valve's original goals of Steam machines by making a gaming PC that's not tethered to a desk and has the ease of use of home consoles. The home screen, library, storefront, it's all things we've seen on consoles and, in Steam's big picture mode before. But it feels a bit more seamless here, to the extent that someone unfamiliar with Steam could feasibly stay within the initial UI for the life of the device without too much hassle. The Steam Deck doesn't necessarily force users to do that though, nor should they really want to. By switching to the desktop, users can download extra apps and emulators to expand how the machine can be used. With the trackpad for mouse control, it's surprisingly comfortable to check storage or change any app settings. Overall, it's honestly the smoothest experience I've ever had using a computer running Linux. That's partly due to the form factor limiting my want to do non-gaming things with the Steam Deck, and partly due to gaming things running without a hitch most of the time. As bad a rap Linux gaming has gotten over the years, this really proves how seamless a Linux machine can be used for gaming. If I had to state any gripes, it'd really be that the keyboard isn't great on the desktop, since it takes up most of the screen and has a tendency to freeze up in certain apps. For non-gaming things, there's also the typical learning curve associated with Arch Linux. Once you know what you're doing, it's not so stressful. I'm currently running Linux distros on a few ThinkPads and a Raspberry Pi, so I'm a bit more familiar than many others might be, but for any newcomers who haven't used Linux before, it's going to be an awkward time while they stumble through online guides if they want to do something outside Steam. Luckily, as I said before, gaming-related tasks like adding, installing, or booting games are all extremely easy. And that's what we really care about, right? In my time with the Steam Deck, I've tried out a variety of Steam games to try to figure out what feels best to play and what the upper limits of the machine are. As a caveat though, for most of my playtime, I'm using fairly default settings and presets provided by each game. As with any computer, you can squeeze out just a little bit more performance by fine-tuning every parameter available, but I was more interested in what it'd be like for someone just picking up a Steam Deck and booting up a game. I'm also booting most games from a 256GB micro SD card, and haven't noticed any issues or slowdowns within Steam games as a result. Okay, let's start by talking performance for basic 2D games. Not that 2D games can't be graphically intensive, but I wanted to try a few games that I figured wouldn't stress the system and would really let me focus on how comfortable the Steam Deck was to use. For that, I chose some classics: Sonic Mania, Hollow Knight, Celeste, and Baba Is You. As expected, the Steam Deck failed to break a sweat while running any of these games. All of them felt super fast and responsive. Uncapping the frame rate for Hollow Knight even resulted in the frame rate spiking to over 200 frames per second, which was nifty to see, even if not entirely noticeable on the Steam Deck's 60Hz display. Temperatures were also generally cool, with fans being mostly quiet with the uncapped frame rate enabled. All the while, visuals looked vibrant and crisp on the LCD display, and I had some personal doubts about Valve's decision to use a 720p LCD in such a pricey device, when OLED displays can offer much better colors and battery life. but the performance actually speaks for itself. It's clear under direct sunlight, and the screen size is just right to feel large at a reasonable distance, while not making every pixel on the screen visible. Estimated battery life also tended to hover at around 3 to 4 hours from a full charge. More would be better, but it's not often I'd find myself playing for that long while far from a charger anyway, and there are gaming laptops that fare much worse. Still, playing for multiple hours at a time felt especially comfy since each game utilized the D-pad and face buttons for all actions. The proximity of those buttons to the side of the case might look awkward at first, but they're at just the right position for me not to have to stretch my thumbs any to play. If I ever missed a jump or poorly timed a dash into an enemy, I can say for certain it was 100% me and not the controller. Honestly, if you find yourself mostly playing less graphically intensive games, the Steam Deck feels like an easy, comfortable way to take them all on the go. They're not pushing the system to its limits or anything, but that's actually a good thing, and means there's a whole swath of games available which won't require folks to be tethered to wall outlets. Next, I tried a few more graphically intensive games to see how the Steam Deck held up, mainly Portal, Control, and Elden Ring. And spoilers, it was good, but not beyond expectations. Portal turns 15 years old in a couple months. Needless to say, it's not really stressing the Steam Deck any, but it does provide a good demo for Steam controller settings. The game still looks fantastic all these years later, and the Steam Deck's control scheme feels very reminiscent of the Steam controllers set up on other computers. The right touchpad can still be used for camera control, while placing a finger on it or the top of the thumbstick enables gyro control. It all works well, albeit a bit less sensitive by default. Luckily, that setting, like the rest of the controls, can be fine-tuned through the main UI with about the same hassle as remapping controls via Steam on other computers. Unfortunately, shifting the touchpad downward makes it slightly more awkward to use overall. The smaller size of the touchpad compared to the Steam controller's wells also means there's less physical space to travel and less overall haptic feedback. I still find myself using the trackpad quite a bit, but I feel less benefit overall to do so over the thumbstick right above it. Overall, platforming still feels very good in Portal, and aiming might even feel a hair above standard controllers after adjusting sensitivity a bit. Even with the changes, I think Steam controller fans will feel very comfortable here. Control is where the Steam Deck starts to whine a bit. Even though it's a few years old at this point, it's still fairly graphically intensive, with flashy particle effects and a ton of complex lighting. At medium to high settings, I can get an average of 40-ish frames per second at native 720p. Beyond a few hitches while opening up the menu, gameplay has been pretty smooth overall, without any noticeable dropped frames past the first few seconds of the game loading in, or small delays while opening the start menu. That performance comes at a bit of a cost though. At higher settings, the CPU and GPU temps start to climb and make the back of the machine toasty. As expected, that means the fans get pretty loud, which then drops battery life even more on top of all the extra resources being used. Those couple hours of gameplay you'll get feels really good to play with this control scheme though. The triggers don't quite have the depth or tension of, say, a DualSense controller, but they feel smooth to quickly spam while firing the service weapon, and their contour design might be just a tad bit more comfortable than the triggers on other controllers. I also haven't noticed my palms get quite as sweaty during long, intense play sessions either. It might not be the best possible looking way to play this game, especially since ray tracing isn't supported here. But man, I really think this might be my favorite way to play this game so far. Okay, finally, let's look at Elden Ring. It's a recent game, large open world, lots of detail in models and environment, and has gameplay that benefits from quick reaction times to enemy movement. I also can't get it to run at 60 FPS with the current graphics presets. That alone could be a deal breaker for some folks for a game like this, considering one frame can make the difference between successfully parrying a strike and looking like the biggest noob in the lands between. It still looks nice and runs slightly above 30 FPS at 720p high settings, but I can feel the Steam Deck struggling a bit. While playing, battery life tanks to an hour at full charge and temperatures spike to above 90 degrees. Quickly, the fans go from mild roar to jet plane. If you wear headphones or crank the speakers up, that extra noise might be okay, but it likely won't be ideal when you're sitting on a couch with someone trying to watch TV, or on a train car with a ton of other people, or worse yet, an international flight with folks trying to sleep. Battery life and fans are a bit of a 1-2 punch, which severely cripple the practical portability of this machine. While you can take the Steam Deck anywhere, it might grab the same social ire as listening to music in public without headphones. Still, social caveats aside, the gameplay experience isn't terrible for a relatively new game that could easily stress larger computers at higher settings. Valve's decision to go with a 720p display kind of pays off here, since fewer pixels need to be pushed. However, it still makes me wonder about how long the Steam Deck will be able to keep up with the latest, most intense games. Obviously, it'll take something much more demanding than Elden Ring to make 720p on low settings chug out sub 30 FPS, or not launch at all. Who knows when a mainstream game like that will actually launch? I'm personally hoping that it'll take a few years to come to fruition, but it's hard to judge when first-gen devices like this will start to feel less than ideal. I've only mentioned a handful of games available on the Steam Deck. The real benefit of these handhelds is the sheer variety of games available, not just through Steam, but also through any other game store or service or Dropbox that works through Linux. Even after the Elden Rings of the game industry prove too stressful, the Hollow Knights will still be around to fill out your library of new games. The only real limitation currently is whether a specific game actually works well with the Steam Deck, i.e. with Arch Linux, Proton, or even the built-in controller. Steam makes it really easy to see which games have been verified as playable or might have issues, and constantly recommends games to play based on that verification status. Still, there are plenty of games available that haven't been verified or are listed as unsupported, which could add some additional friction to using the Steam Deck if a specific game has issues. Not to mention, the core functionality comes with all of the potential online connectivity issues associated with Steam games. Many games will be fine, albeit a bit slower to initially load, but many others are bound to be unplayable without an internet connection. I kinda hate it, but I also wasn't expecting Valve to reinvent the DRM wheel just to benefit their niche device. Both Steam and developers would need to agree to remove those restrictions to really be on par with the portability of traditional handheld consoles. And I don't think that'll happen anytime soon. Though there are signs that Valve is at least trying to make the current situation a bit smoother. If potential DRM restrictions, performance gaps, and compromises to game quality for the sake of portability aren't what you're looking for in a handheld, the Steam Deck just isn't for you. In fact, handheld Linux machines, in general, might not be for you. Even the more powerful devices released in the wake of the Steam Deck are going to have those exact same issues. Really, you might be better off just buying a Switch OLED if you need something portable, or investing in a beefy desktop for remote play and calling it a day. Those options come with their own different compromises, but different might be better for some folks. Okay, To summarize this already long video, the Steam Deck feels great to use. For the right kind of person, like those who enjoy less intense games or want something ultra portable, the Steam Deck gets an incredible amount right, with adequate battery life, a solid variant of the Steam controller's control scheme, and a good-looking UI, which can be as simple or complex as users want to make it. Where the Steam Deck becomes a little more limited is when pushed to handle very intense games, where the mobile APU struggles to keep up. For explicitly non-gaming purposes, awkwardness of input methods and adjusting to Linux can be real downsides. Seriously, if you need to use a keyboard for long stretches of time, you might as well connect an external keyboard to save yourself some headaches. It's just not worth the hassle. Still, even with those struggles, anyone using the Steam Deck will find plenty to love. Outside of a few edge cases, modern games like Elden Ring are still perfectly playable, and the fact that users can actually use their machine for more than playing games provides a lot of flexibility. Especially if they didn't need to use it for a ton of heavy-duty tasks. There's nothing stopping someone from using the Steam Deck as their main computer. But whether or not they should, or whether you should even consider buying the Steam Deck, might come down to whether you believe its compromises are deal breakers, and the competition isn't able to pull you away. In our next videos, we'll take a look at some of the competition and how deciding to buy a Steam Deck today might be a little more complex than at the beginning of 2022, when the Steam Deck first launched. Plus, a whole video just on emulation, because honestly, I think that might provide the most staying power for this machine. For me at least. Until then, I want to know your opinions on the Steam Deck so far. Are its limitations a deal breaker for you? Are you itching to buy one as soon as possible? Are there any competitors you think are better deals right now than the Steam Deck? Head down to the comments and let me know. Also, if you found this video interesting or informative, give it a like to let me know I did a good job. And get subscribed so that you don't miss the next videos in the series. That's all for this video. Until next time, catch you later.